Ready. Ready. Ready.
Hello, welcome to Enlightning. I'm so happy you're here. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to talk about a really super duper brand new CNCF project, Perses, and we have Eric here to teach us about it. Eric, will you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, my name is Eric D Schabell, as you can see in the nice background that she provided. I'm a director of evangelism. I like to make it a little shorter, but basically I run the technical marketing and the developer evangelism teams at Chronosphere. And yeah, Perses has been one of the fun things we've been doing for a while. So it's kind of my hobby project also. So I can't help not talk about it.
Oh, that's the best. So how new is it?
The initial commit that they did was in January of 2021. So
Okay.
it's not super, that far ago, or that recent, but yeah, I think one of the things that's the most interesting is why would we be doing anything with something like this in the first place, right? Everybody always asks why. If you look really close in the CNCF landscape, there's no observability visualization project.
Mm-hmm.
Which is strange, right? All the things that are in there, all the different levels from sandbox to incubation to graduated. Whoa, doesn't anybody want to make something visual? So, I mean, there's projects like Jaeger that have, traces automatically set up to be persisted plus, displayed. But just something that's a standalone thing that you can kind of consider a visualization or a dashboard standard that's not available until about a few weeks ago.
Until a few weeks ago. I know there's some Kubernetes visualizations, like Kubernetes dashboards, to help understand how different components of Kubernetes work together. So we've talked to projects like Meshery or Headlamp, or even Kubernetes dashboard, I suppose, is a Kubernetes sub project, but nothing really for like a dashboard for your observability.
Right.
And that's where we are right now. Which is
awesome.
So
I mean, the idea is to get there eventually. I'm not saying that Perses is there. Of course not. I mean, the current version is 0.47.1. So
okay.
it's working hard. It's getting to where it's gonna go. But one of the really important second aspects in the why is it's specifically been built for Prometheus.
Okay.
So when I say Prometheus, we know we're talking about metrics, and we're talking about a long graduated project that is considered an absolute staple in the CNCF landscape, and you find it everywhere in observability solutions.
Everywhere. Yeah.
And so everything that comes with that means you now have an automatic focus on the accepted standards for observability, storage, querying languages. Prometheus query language, PromQL is the basis of how these dashboards are being designed, and the metrics aspects of it. Just recently, somebody else, we can get to that in a minute, but have added tracing, but it's like easing into the tracing space.
Okay.
So they chose one specific protocol, one specific aspect that they use in their product. It's a vendor.
Okay.
I don't know if we're allowed to mention names and stuff on here, but it was in my presentation at PromCon yesterday.
I got laid off recently. I can do whatever I want, Eric.
Yeah, I don't speak for them. Let's put it that way. But I'm in contact with them, and when I did the PromCon presentation, I asked them if they wanted to contribute any screenshots, and there's 2 screenshots in there of this embedded in OpenShift container platform.
Okay, super
and
cool.
So they're using Perses to put together their dashboarding for their tracing.
So what I'm hearing, a couple things. One is Perses is important because there is no observability dashboard in the CNCF landscape. So here we are. And then you're also saying that Perses, like as part of Prometheus, which is ubiquitous, Prometheus has exporters to help you generate the data. It has collectors to help you collect the data. It has storage, and then it has projects that help expand and help you be able to scale Prometheus. But it's there's nothing Prometheus related dashboard wise, not in the CNCF landscape. Prometheus needs a dashboard. Yeah. And so,
inside Prometheus itself, they have a console, so you can do some, graphing and dashboarding, but it's basically one on top of the other. You can create a new query and a new query, and that's about all they got. It's not designed to be your dashboard solution.
Okay.
It's just for testing.
I do have a question, but I think before I ask the question, I'm itching to write a definition of Perses on the board.
I can see it. I can see.
Yeah, I can see. What is Perses? A Perses is,
Perses is an exploration defining an open standard for visualization and dashboards.
It's an exploration. Okay.
Yeah. So the real vision is to have a standard. So one of the main targets is to become very focused on GitOps and dashboard as code. Oh, so if you look in your Kubernetes landscape and start doing this in large scale environments, one of the things you want to be able to do is have a standardized dashboarding format. So you were mentioning before we started how much you love YAML and JSON and stuff like that. So if you have some kind of standard like that, that means you now have tooling you can build to automate the generation of this.
Cool.
You can create APIs to query whatever you're doing with all this stuff.
Yeah.
And
you use the Kubernetes synchronization loop to make sure it always stays in the state that you
service discovery for data sources is something they've put together, things like this. And so you can imagine your CI/CD now can be completely tuned to include not only the applications and stuff you're putting out there, but deploying also dashboarding with it.
Cool. So I want will you slow down on the definition? It's I just got caught at the exploration word. Like, what even is that in a concrete way?
My friends in the project would be very upset if I did not, read this to you. So that's what I did. So process is an exploration in defining an open source standard for visualization and dashboards for metrics monitoring. This is where it started.
Open source standard. For
observability is what I would say for monitoring.
And then monitoring is a subset of observability. What does monitoring mean?
Well, they have it here for metrics monitoring, which was the initial target, right? That was where they started. The Prometheus focus, very metrics targeted. They also initially from the initial day, they always said that they were a candidate CNCF project. That was the goal, and they hosted initially in the Linux Foundation, and are moving onwards into the CNCF. So you're seeing within the project space, you're going to see quite a bit of change. For example, they're now in the Slack channels on CNCF and things like that with Perses Dev channel. You're going to see some of the GitHub stuff is going to migrate within, the CNCF requirements. And the expansion has already started. So not just metrics, they're already starting to do traces. In the future, you'd hope to see logs being able to be visualized, things like that. So I always feel like I need to slow down so you have a chance to write.
Yeah. Dashboard as code?
Yes, dashboard as code.
I have a question that might be a silly question, but that's how I roll. And that is, so open telemetry is hard to wrap one's head around because it is a lot of standardizations, but then it's also software too. And so why have a separate project for this, for the defining of dashboard as code, when it seems like the OpenTelemetry project has defined literally everything that's tangential observability related,
except for
a dashboard. But then the
right.
question is, why have a separate project for the dashboard instead of just
So
like
you're kind of confusing the architecture here. So
which I thought I might be. Yeah.
out there in the world, I guess we start on your side. Out here in the world, you have whatever you're running, whatever you want to monitor, whatever you're trying to keep your eyes on, and whether you instrument this or whatever the deal is, it's out here either exposing an endpoint that you can pull stuff from, or it's been configured or coded to push stuff to something. So in OpenTelemetry's case, it's pushing, to use your example. There's a collector that's it's ingesting metrics, right? And it's doing whatever it wants to within the collector because there's ability to process some of it before you pass it onwards. OpenTelemetry does not provide any kind of storage for this. They provide the ability to do something with it, processing it, and to use a standard protocol. OpenTelemetry protocol, OTLP. Now you have something that everybody can work towards and use as far as a protocol. What they need to do is put it into a backend, and what that backend is up to your architecture. You know, if we're looking at CNCF, a lot of people would say Jaeger, so that it lands in Jaeger in the backend, which is the storage and pre-built visualization tools for just tracing. Only that one telemetry type. What they've also done is added metrics to their OpenTelemetry protocol. And Prometheus is another backend that can also store metrics. So if OpenTelemetry is pointed at a Prometheus backend with the metrics information, it will put that in there. And then you can query that with Perses, for example, to make visualizations. And one of the very nice things about another things they're focusing on is ability to provide an embedded to embed your visualizations in any user interface. So not just saying I have to use the whole complete dashboard, but I can put a single individual panel in my own UI somewhere.
So in the process, we have our app, we have something collecting, it could be pushing or pulling, and there could be one or more of those. I have one drawn here. And then from there, it's going to, depending on the telemetry type, it's going to go to a different storage backend. Now, in order to have observability, you might want to query, and you might want to visualize, and you might want to alert. I feel like these are the three things you might want to do with all this data and all of these things, right?
So the querying leads to visualization because you're searching data and trying to get an answer to it, right? So that's kind of not exactly what's going on.
They kind of overlap.
And the alerting is usually an engine within one of these backends that's providing you the ability to set up how you want it to look at the data and let you know when things get out of bounds, right? Also, what's kind of funny, if you take a big, huge circle around those backend things, and that's vendors. So vendors are, so right now we're talking, and I'm designing this and pointing you at all the very, and not all vendors have everything, right? You know, but if we look at Chronosphere, for example, this is all encapsulated within the Chronosphere platform. And, that's what they're trying to deliver. And there's some that only do two of them or one of them, depending upon how big they are at the time. But when I'm talking to you, I'm talking from the CNCF side, right? So like open source, that's kind of the way we were looking at this. So just so you understand, it's not strictly, you can buy products to cover all this, but most of your products are going to try to focus on these open standards. You know, they're not super official standardized open things, but OpenTelemetry protocol is one of them. And you see a lot of that in the ability to ingest that is almost essential, which is what we want as architects, right? This is what you want.
Yeah, 100%.
Because in the future, there might be more implementations of the OTLP. And a great example is the containers. Before there was container standardization on the Open Container Initiative, the OCI stuff, you had Docker, you had very little choice. And yeah, you want to be able to use things like Podman or whoever writes your engine. So now you can write a great, big, huge, beautiful dashboard that shows you knobs and dials. And
so Perses, so this database layer has to be vendors, and Perses works with tracing and metrics and logs.
Not with logs yet, no.
Not with logs yet. Okay.
And far. And with the tracing, it's very limited. It only can query because somebody decided to implement what they needed for theirs, and they contributed it back as you do in open source. So the first step was made.
Awesome.
And the first step was with a Grafana query language. So kind of a proprietary language. But the metrics is Prometheus, PromQL, 100% open standard.
So we have one or many apps.
I'm reading your writing. It's crooked for me.
So the metrics has been the focus, is what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
And so that we have our app, we have our something collecting, and that's where open telemetry, it really hangs out in this zone, like in terms of instrumenting your application, or they also have one of their pieces of software is a collector.
And they're not the only one.
Only collector. Yeah.
They're not the only one. I was going to say there's lots of options. So for example, when you're looking at logs, FluentBit is a really good one. FluentBit is actually something you can put in front of open telemetry between you and your app to collect stuff and turn it into things before you give it to your open telemetry collectors that are in your architecture already, because you have some funky stuff on the front end you want to clean up before it goes into your expensive back end. So we could get as complicated as you would like.
Yeah.
The focus is on the other side of the architecture. We want to be over there querying, and we want to make nice, play nice with the data.
I'm going to say like lots of transformation can happen here, right?
Yeah. Because generally speaking, in the observability space, one of the big issues, we're talking about cloud native development, right? We're talking about Kubernetes, we're talking about auto scaling, we're talking about stuff that gets successful and creates a lot of data. And on your back ends, we're finding out that there's a lot of data we don't use. 60, 70, 80% of this stuff we're not even using. We're not querying it. We're not putting it in a dashboard. We're not alerting on it. We're not, so that's completely something we're not looking at right here. But this is why you like to clean stuff up on the front end before you put it into the back end where possible.
All right. Did you say 80+% of the data people don't use?
Could be.
Okay.
I've seen worse.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the 90s. I could speak from the company where I work from that on average, our customers are not using up to 60%.
We have a question, and that question is from Ultimate Love. Could Perses support exemplars for jumping between traces and metrics from a trace?
I've seen it mentioned in the developer channel, so I'm willing to say it's either on the roadmap or it's in. I'm not sure 100% yet. You have to realize this is a young project, and so I'm not watching every single commit. I know it's been discussed. If you would like an instant answer to that, or a better informed answer to that, would be to go over to the Slack channel from the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, and it's Perses-Dev channel. Cool. That's where I would ask it. And if it's not in there, they will tell you the timeline for it. I just can't bring it up in my mind right now exactly what the discussion was about when I saw exemplars go by. Okay. So it's a good question. Very good.
I know I've seen it come up. Yeah, excellent.
It's a good question.
That's a great question. And we appreciate your participation. So Perses is here, and it does visualization, querying, and alerting. Does it do alerting?
No.
Okay. So
Very focused. So for example, the alerting is inside the Prometheus project. They supply one. That's an apart engine.
So it's visualization and querying, focus on metrics, but can do tracing.
And it's only going to get better and better as we move forward. Another really strong aspect of it, I mentioned that it's targeting Kubernetes native, right? So that means custom resources, all the things you need to deploy this in your cloud native architecture.
Nice.
They just recently added service discovery that uses, for example, Kubernetes service discovery mechanism for data sources instead of having to configure them by hand. And they also allow service discovery over HTTP. So that's
nice.
good step. It also has a command line tool that's called, and it's quite funny because some of the main developers are French, so they speak it out completely different than I do. We were talking about that on stage on PromQL, but it's a Perses command line tool, CLI, and it's spelled PERCLI. So I call it Perses CLI or Per CLI, but the French make it sound really nice.
Perfectly.
So if you go watch that recording, one of the questions was about it, and he said it on the microphone. It was quite funny. So this tool is quite comprehensive, and it also provides static validation for your dashboards. So checking your JSON and stuff like that it's a valid dashboard before you're trying to deploy something is pretty darn handy, right? In your CI/CD pipelines. There is also migration from, for example, Grafana dashboards through this tool. It's not 100% because, as you can imagine, there could be almost anything in a dashboard from Grafana. So it's pretty far along. They use it quite a bit in a couple of organizations for standard dashboards, and it works quite well. And every time they encounter something that's not covered, they add it. So it's just getting better and better. But there is a tool there to try.
And is that just as a way to maybe save money to get away from a vendor solution?
It's not so much that, but there's definitely an interest since Grafana changed their licensing that it's not as open as it can be for a lot of people's needs, which does generate an interest in a fully open source project. I'm seriously warning people that it's not a full replacement for a complete, it's young. There's a reason it's in the sandbox. It just got into the sandbox. We're super proud of that. It happened like in days, right? We put it out and asked people I asked the CNCF ambassadors to help me out, and we had hundreds and hundreds of votes, thumbs up on the. It's a GitHub issue, right? So we got them all to go thumbs up on it.
Oh, that's nice.
You have to be a voting member, so that didn't really move the needle, but you're showing them that there's love and support, right? I mean, people are interested, and I put together a whole workshop early days on it before it was even a graphical interface, when it was still just we're doing YAML or JSON on the screen. And it's one of the links you have in your thing, I believe, is from my workshop that is
let me bring that
easy
up.
to get started with it. And it's really nice. You can do it. It's set up so that you can build it from source. You can use it in a container, or you can use the online hosted demo sandbox that they have to play with that.
All right, putting it in the comments now. And then we have a question too. Yeah. The question's from Nigel. Oh, sorry. In Douglas. I think maybe you were a guest of mine on Cloud Native Live before. That's why I said the name. So this might be a silly question, but can Perses visualize system calls activity from the kernel, like with some sort of eBPF probe or something?
Yeah. So if you could set that up to put it into a Prometheus backend where you can query that information, then you can. So the queries that you're going to be setting up in your dashboard for a gauge or a stat chart or a time series table where you're looking at thresholds and stuff, they're always going to be PromQL queries. So you need a Prometheus instance to query.
So, and there's a project Pixie, Pixie, that does eBPF observability. And I think that I'm trying to remember if they integrate with Prometheus, but I kind of think maybe they have their own Python-like query language. But they do have dashboards and stuff. So if you're interested in eBPF metrics, especially, and protocol tracing, then Pixie is your project.
There's a lot of paths that lead to Rome.
Yeah.
I've seen FluentBit take an interest and can collect with whatever input plugins that they use from all the different sources they can get it, and then their transformation process leads to an output plugin, which is an endpoint for Prometheus to scrape. So you can turn logs into metrics, you can turn Elastic into metrics, you can turn lots of stuff into metrics if you so wish.
Yeah.
I haven't checked if they have an eBPF plugin. I'm not sure they do, but maybe that's a path to Rome, for example. Prometheus does support plugins to let users. There's a plugin framework, but I should say that it's on the roadmap because they want to revamp that and make that thing a little bit more easy to use and more extensive. And I know that's definitely something on the work roadmap right now. So
awesome. We also have Perses also works with Cortex comments.
See, there you go. There you go. Yeah, and we just had if you go over to the Perses.dev on their social media or on LinkedIn, they are pushing out anytime somebody says, "Hey, we're also using it," and there's a couple of observability vendors that have put that as part of their stack. So
nice.
You'll find more of those. Yay, Cortex!
Yay, Cortex! We did an episode about Cortex. It was great. Perses. So Perses basically it's a dashboard. It's for visualization and querying, and it's filling up this. Like, there's so much standardization in this part. This part is all you pay for it. There's almost no open source here, and there's also almost no open source.
No, that's not true. So
not CNCF. Excuse me. My.
So you say tracing DB, but you could put Prometheus right there. Not tracing. Sorry, that's like Jaeger. And the metrics would be like Prometheus, and the logs would be FluentBit or whatever.
Sorry about that. I'm glad.
And so when you look at a vendor, if you take like where I work, Chronosphere, they've, among others, generally they offer more than just one protocol, right? So, but they do definitely ingest Prometheus metrics, and they ingest OTel, and they ingest, this, and they ingest that, and then they do tooling around, proprietary stuff to get it, help people get off of it.
And and then is there, like, in terms of protocol, is there standardization for what formats these have to be? The way you store your stuff has to be for Perses or any dashboard to be able to visualize it.
Yeah, currently there's two things you can query. You can query Prometheus, so PromQL for the metrics, and you can query Grafana query language for the solution that's been donated for the tracing. And it's, if you look at the PromCon, too many P's in the space, I'm telling you. PromCon, the talk I did, one of the slides in there is, I feel it's important that you like share the top committers or whatever. So I think the top 20 and listed them out. And it's not a huge group of people that have been working on this from the day one. So it's really understandable that, they're focusing on first this, then this. And the farther you get also in the CNCF process, you'll get more and more help from CNCF, right? There's really neat things that they start offering to help you get better documentation, or to point out, hey, this, to create a proper structure around it, right? And they also, for example, have plans to work on the UI to kind of, through time in any open source project, all these different people are pushing things in, and it's getting a little bit different here, just a little bit off on the looks, so the spacing's not quite as nice. So anybody out there that's a real geek for the UI stuff, there's a huge, you make everybody really happy if you came over and knocked on our door and said, hey, you want to help out cleaning this up? And it's front end's not that hard, right? Front end's not that hard. Come on, Whitney.
With all my extra time. This is great. So do you feel like this is a comprehensive overview of what Perses does?
I think it's a pretty good I think it's a pretty good storyline there.
Here's a question. If who's a company who would adopt Perses as it is today?
Yeah.
What would that company look like?
Anybody that's doing, I would think mostly want to visualize their metrics in some form or another, and also realize within Perses you can take bits and pieces out and embed it in some other UI that you're using in your product organization, whatever the deal is. So you might have a dashboard with a bunch of dials and a bunch of charts and stuff, and you might want this chart to be over here. You can put that in something by itself. That's kind of a big deal. I think companies look to standardize on something that is headed in the direction for sure, and doesn't have a lot of competition to come up with a dashboarding standard. And that standard is pretty far worked out. If you look at the Perses command line interface that does the validation already, the client is provided. You see some of the contributors are from a company called Amadeus. They're pushing pretty hard, and they're big dashboard as a code. That's their hobby.
Yeah.
They are very big on creating the ability to run that.
Can you
manage thousands of dashboards with this? So the more
when
you can
we
automate,
say
the better.
Dashboard as code, what are we? Is it a matter of like, okay, now I can declaratively define where I'm pulling from? Like, what things are being defined as part of a dashboard as code?
Right. So let me see here. I have a listing of exactly the rough overview of how you would look at that. So you have a data source is one of the first things, right? Like we've already talked about, hey, where do I query my data? That's kind of a fundamental thing. And if you're looking at the standard itself of what, let me see here. Here we go. So they talk about a specification, right? So in the specification, how do I create resources within Perses that can then be used? There's 3 high-level things they do. They have a kind, they have a metadata, and they have a spec. And this is going to get into a bit of detail where the reason we have graphical interfaces is we don't want to do this by, by hand, so to speak.
Yeah.
And each one of these kinds is either a project, a dashboard, or a data source. So you're creating a project, you're putting dashboards within that project, and a dashboard is using data sources.
Okay.
Is a good way to look at that, right?
Okay.
And then your metadata underneath each of one of those things is like a name of the project or a name of the resource or whatever the deal is. And you have a data source specification where, is it a local data source? Is it, all the different things? Where do I find it? What's its address? That kind of stuff. And then if you look at the specs within a dashboard, for example, you have a display defining what is this component called. You define a time, how far in the past am I going to look for the data that I'm querying? Because, for example, I can ask for the uptime on the systems that are being tracked inside my Prometheus instance. So all the things that it's scraping, are they up right now? Is generally what the query would be telling you.
So maybe instead of saying it's defining a time frame, for example, we're saying it's defining like what PromQL queries it's visualizing.
Yeah, it's putting specifications around it of what it's going to look like, right? So you're allowed to use variables, for example. It defines variables. It defines the time frame it's looking at. It defines the panels that are going to be in there, and also the layout of those panels, how big they are, where they're at, located on the dashboard.
Yeah. So time frame, yeah. PromQL queries.
And so when all this is put in JSON, now you're talking about code, and now you're talking about you defined a dashboard with all these aspects as code.
Time frame.
How far we're looking back, right?
Window size.
Yeah.
Colors. Do you define the colors?
You can. Yep. Absolutely. That was something my colleague was super excited about. Look, you can change the threshold colors.
Cool.
And you know as well as I do, when you start playing around in JSON or in YAML, it's all format specific, right? So this becomes very interesting to look at when you're doing the YAML. I was really happy when they actually got to a visualized dashboard where you could start, clicking on a button to create a project. And what's really nice inside of all the UI, they provide one tab in there that says this is the JSON, so you can see it and cut and paste it when you're done, should you so wish to do, right? So it's part of the learning. I really like that you don't go away from the dashboard as a code kind of thing.
Yeah.
Not that we all want to run around doing this. Nobody wants to do this by hand. I get that. But when you automate it, once you get to the point where you're going to be, auto scaling, auto deploying, and auto dealing with this stuff, you want to be able to test it. You want to be able to CI/CD it, right?
Yeah, literally everything has to be done by hand one time, so you can do it, so you can automate it in the future.
And I mean, for 9 out of 10 of us, and when you go through the workshop, I walk you through in one of the labs all the details around what you're asking right now. So it goes step by step, shows you examples of actual, JSON or YAML, and that's kind of the holdover from the first run of the workshop back when it was like 0.24. There was very little visualization, so it was all. You could make it visible in the UI, but you couldn't use designers to do it. You couldn't do a lot of that stuff. And so that's still an aspect in it, but most of it spends its time in the UI because it's much more interesting.
Amazing. So are you ready for me to recap, or do you feel like we have more?
Yeah, be my guest. I'm really excited. I think it's pretty.
Good. And if you want, we have room to write some benefits, some overall benefits here. But the dashboard as code benefits alone, like being able to use the Kubernetes synchronization loop, being able to have like a repeatable dashboard base dashboard that then you can customize for different users. Like, it makes a big GitOps, like having it integrate with GitOps and CI/CD, like you talked about a little bit before.
Go crazy. Yeah, I mean,
and you could use it with all the other tools in the Kubernetes ecosystem, make policy around it with Kubernetes,
Yeah, custom resources. That's what they're talking about, right?
Yeah.
CRDs.
So Perses, you're calling it an exploration because you want it to be not only software, but really a standardization.
Yeah, that's the dream.
It's the dream. So Perses is an exploration in defining an open source standard for observability. Should we say for observability dashboards?
Visualization is what I would
observability visualization.
And if you want to remove the observability, you can say dashboards and visualization. That'd probably make everybody happy, right? We know we're in observability.
Dashboard. Because there's other, there are other dashboards.
I know you're trying to channelize this one off into a category, but.
Perses is an exploration in defining an open source standard for observability dashboards and visualization, which is great. So it's a young project, and you've started with metrics. So metrics is where you shine right now, but you're starting to add traces, and eventually logs is on your radar, or really any telemetry signal, because they are evolving. The signals are evolving, and so it's the Perses project. And the goal is to be a standard for dashboard as code. So when we talk about the architecture of observability, this is like a simple case where we have one app, but you probably have zillions, and something collecting information from that app, but you probably might have there's a lot of complexity that could happen here. But what we can say is a lot of transformation happens as part of this step. A lot of standardization has already been done in this area, and that's where the standardization part of the glossary part of open telemetry has come in to really provide standards in this space. And then when something collects it, it might change it, might not, and then our telemetry data needs to get stored. Right. And it's probably going to be stored in a database because we're dealing with tremendous amounts of data. So it's probably going to be stored in a database that's purpose-built for that data type. Because it's
a little bit scary calling them databases because
okay,
like metrics are time series databases, right? So it's
And then also like Jaeger's not really, it's also not just a database.
We're not using SQL queries to query this stuff.
But the idea is like wherever it's stored, whether it's distributed, whether it's short or long term, it does need to be managed by a project. So the storage part needs to be managed. And then when we have our data, we want to be able to visualize it, query it, which is part of visualizing it, and maybe alert on it. And so that's where Perses comes in with the visualization and the querying. So and what's cool about Perses is that there's a lot of standardization, a lot of thought's been put into this, but now the dashboard part doesn't have the standards yet, and that's where Perses is shining and what Perses is doing. So Perses is visualization and querying. It focuses on metrics right now. It does target Kubernetes native, so it's meant for cloud native, which is awesome. We talked about the Percoli, the Perses CLI, which provides static visualization, validation. That's what I meant.
Validation, yes. Oh, yeah, I didn't even catch that. Spelling mistake. We talked about that pre-show.
Yeah, I do invite my guests to be my spell check. There's also a Grafana migration tool, but it's not at all full replacement for Grafana dashboards yet. It's a young project and a young tool too. Yeah. But that is something we're moving forward. Once you have your data, once Perses is visualizing your data, you can query with PromQL or you can query with Grafana's query language. Yeah. And then dashboard as code is how to, using code to define dashboard specific things. So you might define something like what data source you're visualizing from. You might have different ways dashboards could look for different users, so different versions of your dashboard. You can declaratively define how to visualize PromQL queries. So like your time frame, the size your window is, the colors you're using, all those can be declarative, which is kind of awesome. Declarative visual design is awesome.
I think you can sum that part up as being just the automation of the dashboards, right? Being able to automate across your entire architecture and deployment scenarios and all that stuff.
And maybe that's where I want to use this last bit of space, is to kind of write out all the benefits of dashboard as code. But the big problem, people aren't using 80% of telemetry data, which is roughly.
That's just a generic observability thing. And I think 80% is kind of stretching it. I would like to see 60, but I've seen cases that are 80 or more.
Okay. Sure. So people don't use roughly 60.
60 I'm willing to put my money on.
Okay. Cool. So how do you feel about using this space to talk about benefits of dashboard as code?
Be my guest.
Let's do it. Dashboard as code. So we can automate.
Right.
Yeah.
Less people, less mistakes. Right?
Yes.
Or is that not how we want to frame it? I always think it's kind of funny because in the past life had a whole lot to do with business process management, and it was always automating processes in an organization. And everybody always was like in a panic mode about how many jobs are going to get cut and jobs are lost and blah, blah. But you always end up doing something else and usually increasing the number of people because the efficiency is better, more business is generated, more things need to do. It's kind of funny because it's, luckily it turned out that way, but you're initially thinking, uh-oh.
And if you're doing something that can't be automated, I imagine that brings more job satisfaction.
Yeah, I mean, when you're doing stuff that scales, if you can't automate it in Kubernetes, then you're going to have a problem, right? And nobody wants to manage this stuff by hand.
Can integrate with, can use the tools in the cloud native ecosystem is what I want to say, but that's
absolutely, a lot of work. Yeah, that's the idea. So that, what's the right way to phrase that? Can use
other CNCF tools. So GitOps policy.
Yeah, it's definitely GitOps. CI/CD is another one. So your development cycle is also well tested, well validated, and before anything goes out. Very happy.
Etc. Is the Kubernetes synchronization loop worth mentioning?
I don't know what you mean with that exactly.
It stays in the state where you define it. Like I don't know how other dashboards work, but if you're using some sort of interface to say, I want it to look like this, and someone marches around behind you and changes it, you lost your state.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Dashboards tend to be more read-only.
Okay.
If they're editable, you can expand them and remove pieces and stuff like that. But I would assume when you're working with GitOps and DevOps as a code that you refresh these on occasion to set them to whatever you want to have them do.
So cool. Do you want to make a company standard that other people can?
Oh yeah. It's all about standardization. And I think a large part of setting it up as dashboard as code, once that's sorted out, once your infrastructure is set up and you'll be able to do the GitOps and the CI/CD and stuff, it becomes part of the developer experience and the platform experience that you're rolling out every time. And it's expected behavior, expected design, expected, when I get into my dashboards for whatever service, product, thing that I'm responsible for, because generally speaking, dashboarding is targeting the ones carrying the beepers, right? The ones that are responsible for, and SREs, whatever we want to call them, DevOps engineers, whatever your thing in there, and the more standardization you can get in an organization, I think the better, especially at scale.
So what I have is automate. So we have less people, less mistakes. We can use it with other CNCF tools. We can define company standards declaratively, and expected behavior is expected experience.
And the best part is I can still see you.
I'm here. Yeah. Sometimes This was amazing. I think if people have questions, you said to go to the Slack workspace.
Yes.
I also posted the docs, and the website for Perses is perses.dev.
Yeah. Did you get the project site on there for GitHub?
Oops, I just posted
/Perses/Perses.
Let's get it in there.
Yeah.
There's
so within there, you'll also find it's already been standardized for the Sandbox thing. So you find the roadmap document, which talks about what they're working on. There's also the contributing document that shows you how to become a contributor, start helping. I already mentioned, for example, the UI cleanup is something really that might be interesting to someone. You know what I mean? Maybe you're hobby to do UIs, and it's a good chance to get in there.
My son's a JavaScript developer at Adobe.
Right. And I got started in the project doing docs for them.
Oh, so nice.
I put together the workshop and some of the stuff about getting started with it. I just rolled it into the docs, and I'm not one of the big contributors at all. It's like I'm their biggest cheerleader.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
Well, I think that's a wrap. Did we cover everything you wanted to cover? Looks good to me. Amazing. I'm going to play the start music again and say thank you. Thank you so much, Eric, for sharing your time and expertise today. And thanks everyone who came and asked questions. And thanks everyone who watches the recording. It's such a good vibes only. Bye, y'all. Have a great day.